Well, my disagreement, if you could say that, with the Prime Minister is that actually the cultural nationalism that he represents is actually a classic textbook example of the Gulami ki Mansikta that he talks about. Colonialism also produces another kind of slavish mentality, another kind of imitative mentality, which is to say, well, my Indianness should be defined in ways which are similar to that of the British, of the colonial master. You want your Hindu religion to be a religion similar to that of a Christian or Islam religion. Unfortunately, RSS BJP thinks of only one kind of heritage. They want to reduce India's civilizational heritage to just one strand, which is simply not true.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Deshkaal with Yogendra Yadav. Today, we're talking about a debate that has resurfaced about the colonial inheritance of the Macaulay mindset. This is, of course, something that we've been talking about for years and years, or decades, in fact. But it has recently got a new lease of life thanks to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's remarks at the Ramnath Goenka lecture last month. Um, Yogendra ji, I know you have one point of agreement with the Prime Minister, which is what you began your latest column for the Indian Express with. But let's start with what the Macaulay mindset is and then get to what your specific point of agreement is with him.
As you say, Pooja, Macaulay has been discussed in this country ad infinitum.
Yeah.
And there are two kinds of responses. The normal response of the educated, modernized Indians is to say, all this is bunkum, that, that we are fortunate that we had modern education. And, Macaulay, they may not agree with Macaulay's writings or whatever, but they just feel grateful that Macaulay introduced modern education. Macaulay insisted on English education and so on, because the context was this when Macaulay said it. This is about 190 years ago, that many early British educationists who came to India, they said, well, Indians should be given education in their own languages. Specifically, Persian and Sanskrit should be encouraged because these are languages of classical learning in this area. Macaulay said, no, nothing doing. There's no point in spending money on Sanskrit and Persian because they produce no knowledge whatsoever, because all the knowledge of the Orient can be put in one shelf of a British library. This is no more. That we need to produce a different kind of education, modern English education, and different kind of learning, which would give rise to a new kind of elite in skin color and blood Indian, but in their mind, temperament, etc. English. That's a classic Macaulay's formulation, which is cited again and again.
Yeah.
Now, when Prime Minister says this, one set of critics have come back to broadly reiterate that, which is to say, aren't we lucky that we got English education? That all this is an old thing. Don't take it seriously, that there is nothing of the kind that the Prime Minister is talking about. I happen to disagree with those critics, and I happen to agree with the Prime Minister and anyone else who says this, because while we have spoken, we acknowledge political colonialism and its impact. We talk about economic colonialism and the plunder that India underwent. But there is insufficient discussion in modern educated sectors about the cultural and specifically epistemological impact of colonialism. And if the Prime Minister underlines that, and he says that it broke our self-confidence, that it actually led to a gulami ki mansikta, a slave's mentality. And I think is absolutely spot on that. I think we must acknowledge that we underwent epistemic violence as well, that there are ways of thinking, of knowledge available in this country, which were destroyed and delegitimized. And that modern India needs to recover that. So on that, actually, I have no disagreement with the Prime Minister. In fact, I happen to disagree with his critics, some of whom might happen to be my friends.
So, sir, what is your point of disagreement now, which is a much larger and actually pretty provocative point of disagreement that you've raised? Could you please expand on that?
Well, my disagreement, if you could say that, with the Prime Minister is that actually the cultural nationalism that he represents is actually a classic textbook example of the Gulami ki Mansikta that he talks about. Now,
Mhm.
this might sound odd because, normal thing is, oh, RSS represents Hinduism, BJP represents Indianness, pride in India, Indian nationalism, etc., etc. But any serious study of colonialism and its culture has repeatedly pointed out that colonialism produced two kinds of effects. One was among, what are now called brown sahibs, which is
Mhm.
exactly what Macaulay intended to produce.
Mhm.
Brown in skin, but, in their dress, in their behavior, in their mannerism, in their modes of thinking, everything very, very English. So that's one effect, one kind of slavishness that it produces, which is in your face. You can see that, you can detect it. However, colonialism also produces another kind of slavish mentality, another kind of imitative mentality, which is to say, well, my Indianness should be defined in ways which are similar to that of the British, of the colonial master. There is an attempt to imitate the colonial master. So even when you say you are nationalist, you want to be nationalist in a way that British are, that the English or the Europeans are nationalist. You want your Hindu religion to be a religion similar to that of a Christian or Islam religion. Now, that's a kind of imitativeness, which is a deeper imitativeness, because you're not even aware. You think you are protesting against the colonial masters, but in your protest, you are actually imitating them. Ashis Nandy, probably the world's leading scholar on colonialism and its psychological impact, one of the leading thinkers that we have in the world today, he calls it the intimate enemy. So the colonial master is your enemy, but he's also very intimate. You wish to copy him.
Mhm.
So just to take a very simple examples in the 19th century, when the British colonialists arrived, they arrived with the British missionaries who says, "Oh, what is this Hinduism? You have these 330 million Devi Devatas. What kind of religion is that? Where is your Bible? Where is your church?" And the impact, psychological impact, is so deep that Indians and Hindus at that time cannot but say, oh, but we also have our Vedas. We
Mhm.
have our Gita. Incidentally, Gita was never the central text of Hinduism before
Right.
the
Yeah.
19th century.
Mhm.
So we have our Gita, we have our Vedas. Or, well, we have Shankaracharya, well, we have the Mathas, well, we have Lord Rama.
Mhm.
Then the British missionaries would say, "Oh, your God Krishna is actually playing around with women and girls." Then someone like Bonkim says, "No, no, no, that's not real Krishna. Our real Krishna is Krishna of the Kurukshetra." Now,
Mhm.
mind you, all these are responses, in a sense, responses of combat.
Mhm.
These are nationalist responses, but you can see in all these nationalist responses there is a deep sense of inferiority at work. There is a deep sense that we have to be like them. There is an understanding that unless we are nation in a way which is similar to European nations, we are not quite right. Hence this whole thing of a nation state, which
Mhm.
is again a very, very European uh, concept, and not a very old European concept. The
Right.
idea of a nation state whose cultural and political boundaries match. One nation, one language, one religion, one race. This is a very, very European thought.
Right.
And therefore, the very core idea of RSS and the BJP, their cultural nationalism, this is completely imitative of Europe. So,
Mhm.
my response to the Prime Minister is yes, thank you very much for reminding us about Gulami ki Mansikta. Yes, you are absolutely right. And would you not wish to ask RSS and the BJP to change, to shed their Gulami ki Mansikta, which is what drives so much of their core ideology?
Right.
Compared to that, someone like Gandhi, someone like Tagore, these
Mhm.
are people who are truly liberated of sense of inferiority.
Right. So, sir, I'm glad you brought up Tagore and Gandhi because the natural question that now arises is that if we want to shed that defensiveness, if we want to step out of that response that emerges from a sense of inferiority, who are the people that we should turn to? What are the ideas that we should turn to if we want to find our sense of, recover our sense of self, as you say? Uh, can you expand on that?
Absolutely. Recovery of that sense of self is
Yeah.
so critical. In fact, that's again a phrase borrowed from Ashis Nandy. He
Yeah.
says colonialism leads to loss of self. And it is the recovery of the self which is our project, and where people like Ashis Nandy identifies Mahatma Gandhi as one of those critical persons who
Mhm.
can stand up to European civilization and say, "Oh, acha, are you civilized? What is civilizational?" Someone said, "What do you think of the European civilization, Western civilization?" He said, "Well, let them civilize first, then I'll talk about their civilization."
Mhm.
So there is that ability to look in their face and to say, "Oh, but I don't think you're an ideal worth emulating."
Mhm.
I personally prefer Tagore's response to Gandhiji's response, because in Gandhiji's response, there is still a sense of combat, a sense of
Mhm.
saying, "I completely reject you."
Mhm.
In Tagore, I find a much uh, both of them have deep sense of self-confidence about the culture and civilization they come from. In Tagore, I find culturally an ability to draw from multiple sources. Tagore goes to Japan very often, learns. Tagore is equally comfortable with European civilization, deeply rooted in his own culture.
Mhm.
So what we need is, I mean, in fact, we've had for the last 200 years or so, the modernity that India has carved for itself is not an imitative modernity. And that's a modernity which we need to shed. The idea that we should become developed, we should have growth exactly in the manner in which Europe has growth. We should produce some patches which look like Europe and this. That's a Gulami ki Mansikta. Unfortunately, our Prime Minister is completely captured by that Gulami ki Mansikta. But if we can think of our modernity, which is an alternative modernity, which is very desi modernity.
Mhm.
And this is where I draw from people like Tagore. It so happens that I'm just reading two lovely books on Tagore's experiments, his two experiments, Shanti Niketan and Sri Niketan.
Oh, okay.
These two books on Tagore's experiment, these are kind of things which inspire me. That
Mhm.
here is India not turning its back to modernity,
Mhm.
with a capacity to invent, to evolve a new kind of modernity,
Mhm.
which is our own, which suits our needs,
Mhm.
which is not an attempt to copy what happens in the West. And that applies to economy. As I said, we don't need to imitate those kind of ecologically destructive models of so-called development that we have had in the West. It
Right.
applies to culture that I spoke about. It applies to religion. There's absolutely no reason for the Hindus or the Sikhs or Jains, religions which are non-Abrahamic religions, to copy the template of Abrahamic religions. They did what they did there. We do
Mhm.
what we do here. These
Mhm.
are very different kinds of religions. There's no need for one to copy another.
Mhm.
And similarly, in politics, we don't need to copy the failed model of nation state. The
Mhm.
idea of one nation, one culture, one language, one religion, one race. This
Mhm.
is a destructive idea. We have had much better and deeper ideals to learn from, to emulate, to create. So, creation of a desi alternative modernity, drawing upon our last 200 years of encounter, is the way forward. And unfortunately, on that, the BJP and the RSS are actually even more dangerous than the brown sahibs. Brown sahibs' imitativeness is in your face. You can detect it, you can bypass it, you can mock at it.
Mhm.
But when Macaulay comes with a tilak, or
Mhm.
Macaulay comes in a dhoti, that becomes dangerous, because that's something that you don't identify to begin with. You might even mistake it for your own tradition. You can mistake it for your indigeneity, which
Mhm.
it is not. So
Right.
that's why I said, Prime Minister said in the next 10 years, we should get rid of Gulami ki Mansikta. I said, yeah, perfect. So let's begin by first getting rid of RSS BJP mindset, which is more colonized,
Mhm.
more gulami ki mansikta than anything that you find in the modernized Indians.
Right. One of the fears of uh, you know thinking this way, like for many people, could be that unless we have a clear idea of the direction that we want to go in, there could be a reversion to hierarchies of old. Because I mean, this is a nation of multitudes. Like there vast diversity in culture, language, etc. So much like this reviled idea of one language, one, this one identity, would we not fall into the same hole if we don't have a clear idea about how exactly we are going to demacaulize ourselves?
Exactly, and therefore, so much of thought of people like Gandhi and Tagore that I quote, or Ramanohar Lohia that I'm very fond of,
Mhm.
and many other thinkers are grappling exactly with that.
Mhm.
You know, the idea that we need to decolonize, that we
Mhm.
need to get rid of our gulami ki mansikta,
Mhm.
does not and must not mean that we turn around and embrace everything that pre-modern India had. So much of what pre-modern India had is worth junking: caste system, attitude to women, various kinds of hierarchies. Incidentally, traditional society is not the only society of hierarchies. Modernity brings its own set of hierarchies. All societies bring stratification and hierarchies. We need to get rid of that. So that's precisely why I talk about alternative modernity, a
Mhm.
modernity which can build upon our own cultural heritage. And we have such multiple heritage to draw from. Unfortunately, RSS BJP thinks of only one kind of heritage. They want to reduce India's civilizational heritage to just one strand, which
Mhm.
is simply not true. We have multiple strands. Even within Hinduism, we
Mhm.
have so many hundreds and thousands of strands. And it is that plurality of our civilizational heritage which is important, which gives us a choice. We can say, these parts of the traditional culture I want to junk, these I wish to retain. And is that a rejection of tradition? No, because interestingly, in the Indian cultures, the very idea of a parampara is not about parampara is not tradition. Parampara is not retaining whatever you have inherited. Continuing a parampara involves renewal of parampara, involves junking so much of what you have received. This is how you keep a parampara alive.
Mhm.
So I'm all for getting rid of gulami ki mansikta. I'm all for uh, selective approach to what we have received from the past. The way to get rid of gulami ki mansikta is to look at our cultural heritage just as we would look at the cultural heritage from anywhere else in the world. Gulami ki mansikta is not overcome when you say everything in my country is great and everything outside is stupid and foreign and worth junking. The deepest cultural self-confidence is something I find in someone like Tagore,
Mhm.
who can look around and pick anything good from anywhere in the universe. He doesn't feel Japan is less important or China is less important simply because it happens to be politically less powerful at that moment. He can learn anything from the East, he can learn anything from the West because he is so deeply anchored in who he is and where he's doing. That to me is an ideal that we should work towards.
Right. So, as much as anything else, this, getting rid of our ideas of what development and progress are. I mean, these are certain, we think of these things as received as wisdom, like this is common sense now. And what this requires is some sort of intellectual overhaul. It really is an intellectual challenge to think about these things in a different way now. Um, what do you think is a good way to begin?
It is not a common sense. It used to be a common sense about 30, 40 years ago
Mhm.
in European and Western universities, which we learned to copy.
Mm.
The trouble is that they have moved ahead and we are still left with the copy.
Mm.
That's the problem, because the idea that growth alone measures human well being and growth is a single indicator of economic betterment is a very old, rotten, and discarded idea. Some of us still persist with it, but that is not because it is the global common sense. No, people have moved on. They have recognized that there are ecological concerns. They have recognized that there are multiple forms of knowledges, that human well being cannot be captured by economic growth. So that's an old idea. The idea that every country must industrialize, must urbanize, these are only just one way of thinking, and that to my mind truly reflects a gulami ki mansikta, the idea that the entire universe must traverse the same path as Europe did
Mhm.
when it inaugurated what it calls modernity, is an idea which shows a very, very narrow mindset, which is not to say that modernity is something that we don't need to deal with, which is only to acknowledge that modernity has taken distinct, unique paths everywhere in the world, that modernity should take very different paths in different parts of the universe. So the idea that modernity has multiple trajectories is not new. Unfortunately, it's not known in much of the Indian political circles. But this is at least a 30, 40-year old idea. And the idea that there are limits to growth, that growth itself is not a measure of economic well-being, that development is a very unidimensional idea, is an idea that was accepted 30, 40 years ago by UNDP. I mean, I'm not speaking of some left-wing ecological green economists. These are very standard mainstream ideas. We need to learn from that. We need to move forward. The idea that every part of the world will end up replicating the unique experience of Europe
Mhm.
is both historically false and normatively, in terms of moral ideal, this is debilitating.
Mhm.
We have to move forward, and all kinds of ideas are available if we are prepared to look at it. If we are prepared to look at Europe
Mhm.
as just one more part of the world, one more province, which
Mhm.
has something interesting to tell us. But why should we not learn from Vietnam? Why should we not learn from South Africa, from Brazil, their own experience of modernity
Right,
itself? Those
right,
are things we need to open ourselves to.
right, right. But do you have any specific intellectual resources that people can resort to, like you say, these are ideas that have
Two
been
or three
accepted
things I would
elsewhere?
suggest.
Yes.
One, I would really encourage everyone who's listening to this to please read Ashish Nandy,
Mm-hmm.
one of the towering intellectuals. We are so fortunate that such
Mm-hmm.
a towering intellectual is alive and is with us in this country. Never worked abroad, never studied abroad. Ashish Nandy, his famous book on the intimate enemy.
Mm-hmm.
But read anything, he's very
Right.
easily accessible. Read anything by Ashish Nandy. And second, please read up on alternative modernities.
Mm-hmm.
Again, just Google alternative modernities, all kinds of literature would come up. And third would be to just look at the entire literature which is post development, economic thinking
Mm-hmm.
beyond the narrow one dimensional modes of thinking about development and growth.
Mm-hmm.
These are three things you can just Google, find all kinds of books. Please read it up. This would be lovely.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. That is again a lot to think about as usual with any conversation with you. And thank you, viewers, for joining us. We hope to see you again at Deshkal at the next episode. Thank you.